Hello, my name is Estela Onsis from the Transmedia Catalonia Research Group at the Universitat Autònoma de Barcelona. Today, I'm going to give a presentation on native accessible interaction for all, accessible-born social media. The following presentation has been divided in 5 main points. First, we will explain the importance of accessibility. Second, accessibility legislative timeline will be explained. Third, the accessibility and universal design concepts will be explained. We will then jump into the accessible-born social media in current age 2020 projects, and we will end the presentation with some final remarks. Accessibility can be viewed as the ability to access and benefit from some system or entity. The concept often focuses on people with disabilities or special needs and their right of access. Accessibility is strongly related to universal design. This is about making things accessible to all people. According to the latest Eurostat available data, there are about 18 million people aged 15 and over with disabilities in the European Union. This share is likely to increase with an aging population, given that people are more prone to develop disabilities with age. To remedy this situation, the European Commission adopted a European disability strategy for the period 2010-2020, highlighting accessibility as one of its main priorities. The departure point was the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which came into force in 2008. It is the first international human rights treaty requiring that information and communications technologies and systems be accessible as a necessary condition for persons with disabilities to live independently and with dignity on an equal basis with others. 158 countries have ratified the convention. This is over 90% of the countries in the world. 160 countries have signed the convention, which means that they are willing to be bound by its commitments. Article 9 is about accessibility, and it highlights the right to enable persons with disabilities to live independently and participate fully in all aspects of life. To achieve this, Article 9 requires the identification and elimination of obstacles and barriers to accessibility, and that this elimination of barriers shall apply to information, communications, and other services, including electronic services and emergency services. At the European level, the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities has derived into 3 main directives. First, the European Web Accessibility Directive, which establishes common accessibility requirements enabling everyone to read, understand, and complete administrative procedures on public sector websites and mobile applications. Second, the European Accessibility Act, which sets common accessibility requirements, including a number of key ICT products and services. Third, the Audiovisual Media Service Directive, which covers the means to achieve accessibility, such as with sign language, subtitling for the deaf and hard of hearing, and audio descriptions for both television broadcasting and video on demand. These directives do provide the legal framework to tell member states what they have to do, but not how to do it. In order to fill this gap, there are the European Harmonized Standards. Standard EN 301549 is a tool to show compliance with the Accessibility Directive. This technical document incorporates the latest accessibility requirements for web and mobile accessibility, developed by the World Wide Web Consortium, known as W3C, in their WCAG 2.1 guidelines. On the other side, Standard EN 17161 is a tool to guide design for all, accessibility following a design for all approach in products, goods, and services. In the same line, universal design is a framework for the design of living and working spaces and products benefiting the widest possible range of people in the widest range of situations without special or separate design. The 7 principles of universal design were developed in 1997 by a working group of architects, product designers, engineers, and environmental design researchers, led by Ronald Mace in the North Carolina State University. The purpose of the principles is to guide the design of environments, products, and communications from the beginning. In this slide, the 7 principles of universal design are outlined. Principle 1, equitable use. Principle 2, flexibility in use. Principle 3, simple and intuitive use. Principle 4, perceptible information. Principle 5, tolerance for error. Principle 6, low physical effort. Principle 7, size and space for approach and use. A detailed definition of each principle is provided at the document The Principles of Universal Design, version 2.0, available online. You will find the link to this resource in the reference section of this presentation. Accessibility and universal design principles are at the core of all our work that we undertake in research and innovation projects H2020. In all projects, we are in charge or have an active role in defining and managing ethical procedures and project dissemination. In most of them, we also provide the methodological framework for the validation of the technologies. Therefore, accessible-born social media could be considered our leitmotif. Why? Well, because born accessible means that you already introduce accessibility and universal design principles at an early stage of development, not only in technological terms, but also in communication. This helps to identify and remove accessible barriers at an early stage, avoiding high cost due to remediation actions to solve accessibility problems, but most important, it helps you and your team to understand the accessibility needs and ensure the accessibility rights of your audience or future users. Let's focus on how we manage accessibility and universal design for all in our research and innovation projects. Communication is a main pillar in H2020 projects. On one side, we have written communication, which is mainly the ethical procedures and includes all types of documents given to end users before starting any interaction. For instance, when testing any technology with a group of users. On the other hand, we have the web-based communication, which is mainly the website and any social networks used for disseminating any outcomes or results of the project to the general audience. In the case of written communication, and specifically for the ethical procedures, which implies interaction with end users, the following main aspects are integrated in order to ensure that all needs are considered and all rights are preserved. For instance, the use of plain language in a consent form is an inclusive measure in line with the principles of universal design. This means that a single document written in plain language is usable by all people without the need for adaptation. In the case of web-based communication, we follow the WCAG 2.1 guidelines to check that both the web and the social media are accessible. These guidelines are included in the European Web Accessibility Directive, which means that we are also compliant with European legislation and safeguard the rights of the people regardless of their ability or disability. The guidelines are based on 4 principles. Perceivable, which means that the information is easy to comprehend. This means that users must be able to perceive the information being presented, for instance, provide subtitles to video content. Operable, which means that information is easy to access and users can interact regardless of the device or software that they are using. Understandable, which means that the users can navigate through the content in a predictable way. And robust, which means that the web content is compatible with a variety of user agents, such as browsers, assistive technologies, and other means of accessing web content. Some good practices to ensure that your web is accessible are providing alt text when you post an image. This is helpful for people using a screen reader because it allows them to know the content of the image. Also, ensure that information does not rely only on color perception. This means that apart from providing a different color, you should underline the word or put it in bold in order to ensure that people who is colorblind is aware. Also avoid causing the screen to flicker, like in the case of pop-ups, because if this is not handled with accessibility requirements, a user with a screen reader might get stuck with this content. In addition, provide an auditory description of the visual information in multimedia presentations. This means to provide a description of the visual content that a blind person cannot access. Like in this presentation, that we read aloud all content in the slides so blind people can have access to all information on an equal basis. The same with the sound for people who are deaf or hard of hearing. In this case, we include subtitles to cover the needs for the people that are deaf or hard of hearing. Another good practice is using the clearest and simplest language, which is useful to properly communicate your message to your audience. Finally, it is also important to properly identify the language change in the text. In the case that you have different language in the same document, it is important to identify the change of the language specifically for people using a screen reader. These are only some basic examples of good practices, but there is a large list of issues to consider in terms of accessible for the social media that should be considered, not only for the web, but also for the different social media networks. If you are a social media user, bear in mind some basic principles to grant access to your audience. Some examples are: add alternative text to your images, add captions to videos, give hyperlinks meaningful text so people know where the link goes. Capitalize also the first letter of each word in a hashtag to make sure it is read aloud properly by screen readers. Finally, before posting anything on your social media networks, think first. T stands for is it true? H stands for is it helpful? I stands for is it inspiring? N stands for is it necessary? And K stands for is it kind? I hope you enjoyed the presentation. And here there is a link to all our projects: EasyTV, iMac, Helios, Traction, and So Close. In addition, in this slide you have the bibliography that we have used for the presentation. I hope that you enjoy the presentation, and if you have any questions, please let me know.